Welcome back to the podcast. Today we're talking about how understanding food's role in your body can transform your health, your vitality, and even your relationship with yourself. Somewhere along the way, we have really lost our minds when it comes to food. What was once really a mechanism for survival and generally a pleasurable thing has become an extreme topic of debate. Food is now the center of political and health controversies. We have manipulated food by industries for profit and riddled it with conflicting advice everywhere. No one seems to agree on what we should be eating.
That is a fact. If you come into our corner of the internet, you will be bombarded with just every which argument, and everybody is so set in their ways about it. So I'm excited to kind of unravel some of these things with you today.
Yeah, there's a lot of opinions. And I just want to bring it back to a very foundational level, like a cellular level when we talk about food. So on a basic level, our bodies are made up of cells, which contain mitochondria, which is what we generate energy from. We get energy from fuel sources to function, grow, and thrive. And our cells rely on nutrients, vitamins, minerals, on oxygen for energy. And then it relies on sunlight, sleep, and movement for maintenance and support. So all that to say, the vitamins, nutrients, minerals piece of it, that's the food that fuels our cells and helps them generate, grow, function. So food really plays a huge part in our lives, and it influences our gene expression through epigenetics, which just means it can affect how our genes are turned on and off. Different foods feed different type of gut bacteria and influence digestion, immune function, and obviously our mental health. So what we choose to fuel our cells with is incredibly important for our vitality and our quality of life. So today I've really created a structure where we're going to kind of back it up and figure out how did we get to where we are with food, from seeing it as this thing that fuels our cells, brings us pleasure, and is meant for nourishment and survival, to this madness that we have on social media where no one can agree, and we've just lost our minds with it.
Enlighten us, Caroline.
Okay. So in my research, I was basically trying to figure out how we got to where we are with all the fake food we have. So originally we had, natural forms of food from nature. And then we discovered pasteurization in the 1800s. Things like pasteurization, canning were the first forms of like processed foods and preserved foods. And they were just there to create longer shelf lives and opportunities for food, really for war, for military men. And from there, in the 90s, we advanced more to like chemical processing and additives and creating more preservation in that way. And that was also war motivated. That was more towards World War I and II. So through this process, we over time created like this innovation that turned food from preservation, pasteurization for war and increasing shelf life to, my goodness, this can be a really profitable industry. So as food scientists, we're helping create more ways to prevent disease and reduce food waste. They created something called the bliss point. So food scientists discovered this bliss point, which was the perfect ratio of sugar, salt, and fat. And they realized that when they created this perfect level of sugar, salt, and fat, it created a huge release of dopamine in our brain, which basically lit up our brains and made it insatiable and addictive. And they decided to just use that ratio in everything. So they put it in Coca-Cola, Pepsi, Kraft, Nestle. Everything was strategically using this ratio of fat, salt, and sugar. And of course, the fat, salt, and sugar at the time evolved because for industry profit, we had to make it cheaper. So we started using things like high fructose corn syrup, which uses fructose instead of glucose, and it's in a liquid form, so it can easily be added to everything. And they realized that this was extremely profitable, and they started just mass producing these extremely addictive substances. So what started out as this intention to create pasteurized food, prolong the shelf life, create more food for millions of people during war, a really noble purpose, became this huge thing of higher profits and just making food last longer because it engineered cheaper, easier to produce, addictive foods. So that's how we got to where we are today when it comes to processed foods.
I would love to go back in time, like when these products were being introduced. And I'm sure it seemed so novel, but how long did it take people to accept these things and be yeah, I'm totally on board with this? Because, they had such a traditional way of eating for so long.
Right. And there were things that were taking place in the government and with science that were really manipulating people. In the 1950s, there was a scientist, Ansel Keys, who published the 7-country study. And in this study, he was trying to prove a hypothesis that a higher fat intake created heart disease. And so he actually ended up cherry picking the data and leaving certain countries out of the data that were not proving his hypothesis, such as France at the time, which had high fat intake but low heart disease. And basically, our government decided to follow that science. And in 1977, the US government released the low-fat dietary guidelines and increased carbs. So this is when we started to see the food pyramid come about. The processed food industries the companies began to formulate products by removing fat and creating low-fat products because our government policies were showing that that's what people should eat. So that is where the fat makes you fat came from. And as we know, fat does not cause heart disease.
Right. So Ansel Keys, was he just independently doing these studies, or was there some organization or corporation kind of
Good
looking
question.
for this data? Yeah, I'm going to Google that. Yes. So 1956, the dietary fat cholesterol link was made through Dr. Ansel Keys' AHA-supported research. So the American Heart Association demonizing fat.
Shocking. And what we know about fat is that it's essential for metabolism, hormone production, cell function, and that processed carbs and sugar actually are the cause of heart disease, diabetes, obesity, blood sugar dysregulation, chronic inflammation, and not fat. So we really had it upside down. When we say flip the food pyramid, it's literal.
Yeah. Well, and not to mention that our brains are 60% fat and we need that for brain function. And we grew up in the 90s when the low fat craze was still happening. And it just kind of sad to think back and be wow, we really weren't consuming enough fat. How much better could we have been functioning if we had the correct ratio of nutrients in our diets?
Have you ever found a healthy food you love only to discover it's actually loaded with toxic ingredients, greenwashed with pretty packaging and clever marketing?
Yes, it is so frustrating, and you are not alone. That's why we created Master the Market, your ultimate guide to shopping smarter, decoding tricky labels, and stocking your kitchen with truly nourishing foods.
This extensive ebook breaks it all down. From hidden additives to the best produce, proteins, and pantry staples, you can shop with confidence.
Say goodbye to grocery store overwhelm. Grab your copy of Master the Market today. Click the link in the show notes to get started.
Right. Exactly. And then all of this got me thinking about restaurants and fast food, because we also had so much fat intake from restaurants through seed oils. And I was wondering about that evolution. So we had the evolution of processed foods and then putting high fructose corn syrup and everything, using seed oils and, low quality salt, wasn't high quality salt, and chemically engineering foods to be extremely addictive. So what about restaurants? So when I was looking up restaurants, what I found was that it was such a high luxury to eat at a restaurant. It was not for common people. There weren't really restaurants the way that we have them. Everyone was cooking at home. Most people were cooking their meals at home. But when the assembly line model picked up and was popularized by McDonald's, everything became faster and cheaper. So when kind of desk culture too was coming up, people got busier with work jobs and that's when we started to see like fast food restaurants and cafes and more normal things for normal people, restaurants for normal people.
Yeah, because this is kind of like happening as industrialization is picking up and people are finding work outside of the home more.
Exactly. So we have the rise of like industrialization, assembly line work, and then eventually desk work, people moving to cities. And at the same time, we also have car culture coming about in the 90s. So people are walking less, driving more. Than they invented drive-throughs. So we just have this boom of high calorie, low quality food, I should say, and less walking, more driving, more high convenience food. And then we also think about TV and how it became commercialized around the same time. People started to, I think this was later. I think people more so started to have commercialized TV like in the 70s more so, when it became more popular to have in a home for everyone. But having that as a piece of their everyday life where you're sitting still in front of a TV. So we're having this mass increase of calories and fake food and mass decrease of movement at the same time.
What an equation for the health of our society.
What an equation. So then it really got me thinking about food source, because like we said, like food fuels your cells. And so many people, as we can see through this narration, were becoming really disconnected from their source of food because we were no longer getting it from the vendors at your local farmer's market, your local farmer, your local bush, your dairy farmers, your bakers. Like you used to get all your food from local markets and vendors. And you really had conversations with those people. You knew where their shops were. You knew where their farms were. And you had a pretty good idea of how the food itself was sourced. But then supermarkets became a thing. So when supermarkets became a thing, we started to pack them full of processed foods. And even if you are going to a supermarket today and buying, say, like a chicken, which would be a great option, you still don't often know like where that chicken is from, what went into that chicken's life, and the amount of supply chain that it took to get that chicken to your shopping cart. So there's just a huge disconnect from the source of our food today.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing too, I would say with that is like, for instance, at my supermarket, you can buy a like fairly local chicken, but it's going to be more expensive than the other whole chickens.
Right.
So you have to unless you're going in intentionally saying, I want to buy a Hooterite chicken, which that's like the group of people that are supplying these chickens, you're probably going the conventionally raised one that is a couple bucks cheaper.
Right.
Which is crazy because the one that traveled a shorter distance is a little bit more expensive.
Yeah, higher quality. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was just so fascinating for me to make these connections because I was like seeing My gosh, we had the rise of processed foods from this like 100-year period from the 90s to now. We've had this huge increase in food science and what we think food even is, right? Like, is it food or is it an edible product if it has literally no nutrients in it? And what they started doing with processed foods was they started to realize that it had no nutritional benefits. So they fortified it and they added nutrients to it so that they could market it to people on the box and say, look, it has vitamin D. And then what else did they do was they targeted their marketing to children because they realized that that was a lifelong brand loyalty customer. If they could get them early loving Kellogg's, then they'll eat Kellogg's for the rest of their life.
Yeah. Well, and did you know that the like children's eye level shelves, like especially in the cereal aisle, are like prime real estate? Like it costs more to stock your products on those shelves.
Yeah, the eye level and then also the checkout, because kids have to stand there and wait at the checkout and they know kids are impatient. And then those shelves are also eye level as well. And they're filled with candy.
Yes. Candy, donuts.
Yeah.
Hand pies.
So I was realizing we had this huge boom from the 1900s to now of processed foods and what that looks like for us. Then we have the huge rise of supermarkets, and we stopped understanding the source of our food or what it's sprayed with or having any idea where it came from. And then we have this, switch from physical labor to desk work with the rise of cars. We're just moving so much less than we were when we were hunting and gathering and farming and having laborious jobs. And then at the same time, we had the evolution of artificial light over the same course of time, where our light sources used to be sunlight, moonlight, fire, candles. And now we have the light bulb invention, and then was the light bulb invented late 1800s. So before that, we didn't have huge supermarkets and public spheres that were filled with fluorescent lights. But now everywhere you go, you're bombarded with fluorescent lights. And then we have TV, and blue light has continued to increase to be everywhere we are. So we have just truly hijacked our biology in an insane way. And then we didn't even get to technology and what that does to our dopamine sources. But when you look at all of it.
Well, and in such a short amount of time, like if you put everything into perspective, for centuries, for generations, people were pretty much eating the same way. I think things were slightly improving over time, but the whole industrialization process really just like fast-tracked things to what they are today.
And no one bats an eye. And why would they? Because for most people, well, and this is all we've ever known. Like, if you're born in the 1900s, you were born, which everyone alive today was. I mean, not everyone alive today was, but like, you're not born before the 1900s if you're alive today. And this is all that you know. All you know is fake food and supermarkets and restaurants and fake lights and fast moving, cheap dopamine. So why would we ever bat an eye at that? But when we actually look into the evolution of our biology and we think about how fast all of these changes have taken place, we have to, and we know that we see the science of how it's hurting us, we have to rethink things.
Yeah. And I think that's maybe some of the discord that we're seeing today is like a lot of people don't want to rethink anything or question the way things have been or the way things are progressing.
And why do you think that is?
I think part of it is like comfort and convenience, and also just like a disconnect from traditional ways of living. Like this is something that I know you're really passionate about, of like returning to nature and, just being a little bit more traditional. And I mean, Whole Foods, we're calling them traditional, I guess. But I think, yeah, we've just become so accustomed to the way things are. And if you're not aware of the difference, I mean, so for example, before I really got into health and like healing my body, I was suffering from acne and I started to get kind of curious about some stuff. And I bought a golden milk powder mix, like a turmeric and ginger powder mix to make a golden milk lattes. So I started drinking these. And I think that at the time that was like one of the only things that I had changed about my diet. And there was such a dramatic decrease in the redness and inflammation in my skin that other people were like, I noticed it, but other people were commenting on it too. And I was like, I'm just drinking turmeric. Like it's creating such a drastic change. And I had before that no idea that what I'm putting in my body could have that type of effect. So I think unless you've really experienced something, you're like, whatever, food is food. A calorie is a calorie.
Yeah, it's so far removed, I guess, from where I am. But you're right. I do feel really passionate about reminding people that we are first and foremost animals and of nature. Nature is our first and foremost habitat. Like you're not entitled. You're born into this world with nothing and you leave with nothing. And you're not entitled to like a shelter. Those are things that we create for ourselves, but our habitat is nature. And we are designed to interact with nature, and nature provides everything that we need. And that includes food. Like when we look at food from nature, including animal products, plant products, nuts, seeds, like when we consume these unprocessed foods that our ancestors ate for all of time, our bodies know exactly how to extract the nutrients, extract the vitamins and the minerals, and do exactly what our body needs with them to create perfect balance and energy and to reduce inflammation. And when we eat these artificial additives and refined sugars and low-fat processed foods, our bodies are highly confused. This is not the chemistry that it knows.
Yeah, we're totally confusing our bodies.
Totally confused.
That kind of makes me think like when it's summer here, like it is just so magical. And our favorite thing to do is go for a hike, and we'll go find a spot at a lake, and Jordan will fish all day, and we'll cook those fish over the campfire. And then while we're hiking out, we're just picking berries off of the bushes and eating those. So like we could really just stay up there as long as we wanted to, except like we have to come back to reality on Monday and like go back to work. But there's nothing more like grounding and satisfying than just like being totally disconnected from the modern world and just being like self-sustaining in the middle of the woods.
That's so cool. That is really
it's pretty cool. And I had never, before moving here, I'd never really experienced anything like that before. Mm-hmm. But nature does provide.
It does provide. And it's so interesting too. Like you bring up fishing, and this is something that I think about a lot, is we have no struggle in modern society anymore. Like food was supposed to be, well, not supposed to be. I mean, I guess that's subjective, but food for all of time was something that we struggled for. Like that was the reward after a long day of hunting and gathering and fishing. And those things took patience, time, effort, work. And then you come home and you have to clean that animal, create the actual food out of it, then cook with it. And same with the produce. And So the food at the end of the day was a super high pleasure reward of dopamine. But now we just get these extreme hits of dopamine from sugary cereals first thing in the morning, extreme hits of dopamine from scrolling on our phones first thing in the morning, and we didn't have to do any work for it. So everything as far as our like pleasure and reward centers in our brain has been flipped upside down in the past 100 years, especially as it relates to what is going in our bodies.
Yeah, it is. It's pretty wild. And I mean, this was my first year where we got game. Jordan got a buck, and it was really an interesting process. I mean, he has a job, like a regular job during the week, so he could only go hunting on the weekends, but it took him probably about, I would say at least 4 or 5 weeks that he went out every weekend. And he had a couple close calls where he almost got one. And then finally he did get one. He was really happy about it. But I was kind of thinking, like, if we were solely relying on this meat to feed us, like, that's like feast or famine. Like, you have to be so focused on what you're doing and in that like provider mindset in order to be putting food on the table. And that's so disconnected from the way that we live our lives today, to your point, because you can just run into the supermarket and grab a rotisserie chicken in a plastic bag.
Mm-hmm. If you're even eating real food, you know, like
True.
If you're buying a chicken, otherwise you're just buying, you know, fake foods or fake chicken nuggets or whatever it is. And you're just eating something that's not even provide nutrients, but is so rewarding to your brain.
Well, and it's kind of crazy too, because I made the mistake of commenting on a video about fish last year, saying that I ate fish out of a lake that we caught. And you would not believe like the mean comments that I got. And like so many people were mad that we were catching fish and eating them. And they were like, well, what? There's not going to be enough fish. Like, what if everybody was catching fish and eating them? There would be no more fish. And I was like, that's not how this works. And like, literally, if you go back 150 years, that's how people were providing for themselves. Is our population much greater now? Yes. But it just proves a point that people are so disconnected from this way of living and nourishing themselves.
Yeah. And the spiritual essence of it as well is we're so disconnected from. And this is something that we talk about in our reset program, but like the sacredness of food. And when we look at ancient texts over time and we compare the way that they interacted with food, like many cultures blessed their food, they prayed over their food. And I always bring up the show Alone, which is when they drop people in the wilderness and their job is to survive. But when they get an animal or they find food, they cry, they, you know, say prayers, they fall to the ground and say, thank you, thank you, thank you. There was so much sacredness and reverence for the food and the way that they prepare the food and cook the food. You can tell that they are so thankful for the nourishment that it's going to supply to their body. And that's what we try to really gift our clients with in our reset program, is that mentality that food is such a blessing and a nourishment to our body. And that has really turned some light bulbs on in a lot of our clients' minds of the way that they have viewed food for a long time, because we have this really warped perception of food due to its overabundance and accessibility, that a lot of us have been just looking at food as something that we shouldn't eat or shouldn't have too much of. And it's complete flip-flop from the desperation that our ancestors experienced in that feast or famine state to just like counting calories and trying to eat as little as possible.
Hey everyone, it's Caitlin.
And Caroline.
If you've been feeling out of sync, whether it's low energy, stubborn weight gain, hormonal imbalance, or just not feeling your best, we've got something for you.
Enrollment for our spring reset is officially open. This 10-week expert-led program is designed to help you transform your health through our 3 pillars of success: accountability, consistency, and community.
Over 10 weeks, we'll cover everything from nutrition, movement, and sleep to detoxing and finding your purpose, so you can build lasting habits and feel your best from the inside out.
You won't be doing it alone. You'll have personalized support from us, your expert guidance, and an amazing group of like-minded women who are on the same journey with you. Our current group is experiencing amazing breakthroughs, from food freedom to improved energy and focus, and even regulated cycles.
The reset kicks off April 7th, so don't wait. Secure your spot now. We are offering $250 off the full price for the early bird special from now until March 17th.
Head to the link in our show notes to sign up. Let's do it together.
This is actually something that I've been contemplating a little bit, like if there's a difference, and this is probably not across the board, but I have observed that I think women maybe tend to struggle a little bit more with these types of things like, oh, is this, like, should I be putting this in my body? Like, is this a good thing? Is that a good thing? Where men can kind of like almost disassociate with it and be like, food is fuel, like that. It's just like cut and dry. Like I'm just eating this to fuel my body and to get energy. And that's not to say that men don't enjoy food or anything like that, but I think that maybe there's a little bit more entanglement for women. I don't know. That's just my observation. What do you think?
Entanglement in what way?
Just in, I don't know, maybe like overcomplicating it a little bit, and creating negative connotations or relationships with food.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it has to do with body image and, with the rise of food science and supermarkets and less moving, there was also a boom of obesity and people got bigger. And I think that we were also trying to navigate that complexity as a society as we were moving towards people getting bigger and people wanting to not be bigger. Right. And women gain weight maybe more than men. Is that what you mean?
I mean, I wasn't even thinking of it that way, but there also has always been such an emphasis on the physical appearance of women. Right. So of course that's going to impact like some of your thought processes around it as well. Just a thought.
Yeah. Yeah. It's really interesting. I mean, I've just, since I did this research, been really floored to see the complete transition that we've experienced in the past 100 years. And it makes a lot of sense. There's a lot of people calling for kind of like an undoing of the things that we've seen. I feel like there's a number of communities online who are like, wait, can we just like stuff all this back into the box where it came from and go back to the like 1800s way of living where we're, synced with nature and we're getting our food from farming and local sources and we're not experiencing these health issues and we're not chasing cheap dopamine. Like there's this movement, I think, in the holistic health and health communities of like undoing the hijacking of our biology that has happened over the last 100 years.
Yeah, I definitely see that too. And it's hard when you're fighting against people that maybe have credentials or degrees that are defending things like seed oils. But if you go back and like we're talking about industrialization, a lot of these things that they introduced into the food market were just byproducts. It was waste that they were like, oh, what could we do with this? Like Crisco, for example, replaced lard in cooking, but Crisco is just a byproduct. It's, you call it, what did you call it? An edible product. It's not necessarily something that has nutritional value. I grew up in a house that always had Crisco in the pantry, and that's what we were using to grease the baking dish. You'll never find a jar of Crisco in my house. But people are so married to those ideas. They're like, well, this is something that I've had forever. That doesn't mean it's good for you.
Right. And I always say just because something is scientifically safe, quote unquote, doesn't mean it's biologically optimal. It can be scientifically safe, but not good for your body. It doesn't plug into your cells the way that whole foods do and produce vitality and like create the cascade of positive events in your body to create balance. It's usually pulling you, like those processed foods are usually pulling you out of balance and into a more inflammatory state. And it really is spiritual when you look at it from that sacred lens, because we can see that nature provided everything we needed for our fuels or for our cells to be fueled and to function properly. And then we have this corporate capture that's really pulling us away from our really unique, I mean, humans are the most unique species on the planet in that we have consciousness and we're able to create technology and all the things that we do. And we are fueling ourselves with basically poison in a way, things that don't plug into it and know what our cells don't know what to do with it. The picture I wanted to paint more so with this was like over the past 100 years, look at all the ways that our biology has been like hijacked.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I would think you were kind of moving towards we changed our food and we can look at the rise in chronic health issues. It's all directly correlated. And to your point, these things have been introduced as like food safe, but they didn't really have any evidence to back it up. Now, the past 100 years is the evidence. We're sick.
Yeah, we're sick. And that's the other thing I wanted to bring up was like science has been captured. There's all these debates about anti-science and trust the science. And the science that we have is not one science, right? Like I just talked about that 7-country study in 1950s where the data was cherry picked. And yeah, we have the scientific method and we have double-blind placebo. But you can manipulate statistics and you can manipulate science. You can also fund science in a certain way to push certain narratives. Like, I don't think people are aware that there's not just one version of science. In theory, there should be one version of science where, like, science is the truth, but it's never that simple. And it's just not the way that it works in society today. There's multiple sciences, and science has been captured by corporate influence in this way as well.
I think it comes down to bias. And actually, this is something that popped into my head yesterday. I don't really ever watch the news anymore, but I used to. And like growing up, the Today Show was always on in the morning. And I always I love knowing about current events and things like that. So I was always a news consumer. And I don't know if you remember, like one of the like common headlines would be like, oh, a new study found that so and this reduce this, or this is correlated to this. And there's always these new studies coming out with these like new facts that are supposedly supposed to influence how we're living our lives. And then I remember this so vividly because I thought it was so funny. There was this, I don't know if it was one specific study that like then triggered them to look into other things, but basically they realized that most of these studies that are being published and they're like, this is the word, like you need to listen to this. Most of those studies cannot be replicated with the same results. So it's just like people have bias. People might be manipulating results. Things might have just happened to work out one way in this specific study. I think that is something that has disconnected us from our intuition a lot, is like trusting the science. But also like, you know what's best for you. Like your intuition is there for a reason.
And our intuition is something that, again, we have evolved with for all of time. And it really does. When I look at this evolution over the past 100 years and the way that society is increasing cheap dopamine, fake food to hijack our biology, fake lights, breaking our intuition by saying science is the truth and there's no questioning it. I mean, it really does bring me back to my knowledge in the Bible, and it makes me believe more and more in God, because it's like truly, when I say it's spiritual, you can like see the devil at work, like truly bringing us further and further away from our intuition, further and further away from our biology and our connection with nature and all of the things that I think God designed us to have and to be. And when you look at it from that lens, it's like, I can't unsee it.
Yeah. Well, there's a great book that is, I think Dr. Lissa Rankin is the author. It's called Mind Over Medicine. And she's somebody that came from the Western medicine space and had her own healing journey of like realization about all these holistic things. And she really started to do some research into it. And she found that really, like, no matter what your prognosis was or what your path of treatment was, your belief that you were going to get better was the deciding factor of if you were going to get better. Your mind is so powerful. So yes, there's science, but also like you are a powerful being and you have to use your mind in the right way.
Totally. Yeah. There's a lot of things that we don't see that we can't explain. And science really is all about what you can see and what you can prove and what the evidence is. But I think there's way more nuance to it. And there's just things that can't be explained, like our intuition.
Hey there, it's Caitlin, the creator of Cyclical Pilates, and I have something really special to share.
And I'm Caroline, yoga instructor and wellness enthusiast. I'm so excited to be joining Caitlin in the stunning Mayan Riviera this October for an unforgettable Pilates and yoga retreat.
That is right. From October 20th to 26th, 2025, we're inviting you to unplug from daily stress and reconnect with your body through cyclical Pilates, strength training, yoga, and restorative flows, all by the turquoise waters of the Caribbean.
And it's all happening at Copal Retreats, a gorgeous beachfront oasis where you'll enjoy luxurious accommodations, nourishing meals, a sound bowl ceremony, a 1-hour massage, cultural excursions, and plenty of times to relax and explore.
This retreat is all about movement, connection, and balance. With just the right mix of adventure and restoration, and with everything taken care of, all you have to do is show up.
Spots are limited, so if this sounds like the reset you need, head to the link in our show notes to reserve your place.
We can't wait to move, breathe, and unwind with you in paradise. See you in the Mayan Riviera.